will we be able to see who's all online in the top there, or is that? Oh, I see the
No.
participants on the side. Okay.
Yeah. I think since I'm screen sharing, I'm not fully seeing how many folks have joined, but Katrina, once you see a good number.
We have 20.
Oh, okay. I think maybe a few seconds more and then we can get going.
All right, welcome everyone to today's Tribal Connectivity webinar. My name is Katrina Tysinger, and I'm a broadband grant specialist with Learn, Design, Apply. Just a little bit about LDA, we're a grants consulting and management company, and with all the excitement and funding in broadband, our broadband team just keeps growing in numbers. We're really excited to hear from some tribal broadband knowledge experts today. Just a little housekeeping though before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box for our Q&A session towards the end. We're joined today by Terrence Shanigan, Alaska Native from the Bristol Bay region and Executive Director of the newly founded Tribal Telecom Council of Alaska. He works to advocate for Alaska tribes at the local, state, and federal level. We are also joined by Ernie Rasmussen, citizen of the Oneida Nation and Executive Director of Bigfoot Telecommunications of the Colville tribes in Washington State. Last but not least, we have Megan Beresford, Director of Broadband Programs with LDA. Megan has helped secure millions in tribal broadband funding and brings insight from a grant writing perspective. Now, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Terrence to start us off.
Good morning. It's nice to see so many people online this morning. I'm going to just kind of walk through some questions, explain a little bit about what the Tribal Telecom Council is, and then share some depth as to what it works with and how it's an advocate and what it can do for tribes. On your screen, what is the Tribal Telecom Council? Well, as we started to look at this evolving landscape of telecom and broadband in Alaska, we identified quickly that there wasn't an organization that specifically advocated and represented the voice of tribes. There are a lot of organizations that take angles on this, but like the Alaska Federation of Natives, Alaska Village Initiatives, even in Alaska, we have Native corporations, but none of them singularly represented all tribes and specifically the tribe's interests in broadband. And so that was how the Telecom Council came to be. And in a nutshell, it is positioned to be a voice and an advocate for the tribes and the tribe's interests. A good question came up yesterday in some discussion for those that might be familiar with NTTA and how that differs from or is similar to the Tribal Telecom Council. The Tribal Telecom Council voting membership are the actual tribes themselves, whereas NTTA, the voting membership, are the tribal telecoms. And the telecom doesn't always have a tribe's interest at heart. And up here, the same thing. We have a tribe that might create a telecom, and the telecom is going to have a business focus, a business interest, deployment interest, and it's around the technology. Whereas the tribe may have a separate interest in the broadband discussion. And so where the TTC comes in is that voice of advocacy. And that kind of leads into the second question of who can be a part of the Telecom Council. Well, if you're a tribe, you're a shoo-in. All of the voting members are around the table, but there are also affiliate members. So if you are a tribal organization or you have some interest, we have, for example, worked closely with one of our tribal design, build, and deployment construction companies called Alaska Tribal Broadband. They can be an affiliate member, for example, to the TTC. And that, with that arrangement, they make themselves available to any tribes that are members to access them for things like feasibility studies or planning on a broadband build out, or maybe they just want to get a bid from them to construct, design, and build something. So the council can serve as a clearinghouse of sorts to bring these members together, bring fundraisers into the mix to help them to look for grant opportunities. The council can also provide the resources to look at training. So for us in Alaska, we have an organization that brings federal money in called the Denali Commission. And so the council can go out to the Denali Commission with assistance from grant writers, apply for grants, bring that money, and make that available to members of the Tribal Telecom Council. And so it is just a place that is sort of a one-stop shop to access everything from training to construction services, advocacy, legislation. And that kind of leads us into this next piece where, you know, how far do we go and what do we do? The Tribal Telecom Council, in some cases, may deliver the training, but in other cases may provide an avenue to access training through existing infrastructure, say in a local state through the Department of Labor, or if we have a university level program that's available. How do we get that information out to the members? Well, we'll have regular communications with all of our tribes that are participating. And I guess one of the things too is that what the council will do is to help tribes keep track of all of the funding opportunities that are out there. And what we've found is that many tribes understand one or two of the funding streams, like the NTIA, but there are so many different versions of the NTIA and other grant pots of money available that it's one of the more confusing topic areas for the tribes to deal with. And what we're running into is they are confusing pots of money. They're not sure how to apply. They don't have the resources to write grants. And so by doing this, it's sort of in one way can be a compact of sorts where they can come together, pull resources, and even apply for things as a group or subgroups of entities. And I think that kind of moves us through the funding opportunities. I have someone that's on the chat today, Brad Anguson, who's been working on different funding opportunities, much more of an expert on all of the varieties of the NTIA and who is and who isn't eligible and how that process is working out. And so, you know, maybe if there's questions about that specifically, we can have Brad kind of give us some clarity there. As far as the build out, one of the things that the Tribal Telecom Council can help with is that if you have an interested tribe that's looking for example, they have some money or they just have a plan and they want to do something, they can come and say, hey, who would I look for in like a directory that will help us to, in this case, build something out with planning, doing ground surveys, engineering. Right now, what we're doing is we're actually doing a feasibility study for a tribe in Ketchikan. And what they had was a need to figure out if they had broadband capacity in their tribal community, which is attached to an urban community. And what we found out for them through this feasibility study, which we're just concluding, we've been working on it since May, is that the community of Ketchikan, which has about 15,000 people, their fiber stops really close to the tribal community's land. And then the tribal community has limited fiber running into it. And depending on the type of deployment that they would like to do, they can either do microwave, or they can do low Earth satellite, or they can actually have fiber put in. The feasibility study opens those options up for them through discovery of figuring out what it is their needs are. But we're working with local healthcare providers to figure out what they would need for telemedicine, with the schools, Department of Labor, and with the university system to look at what distance learning and even workforce learning would look like, and what the needs are. Everything from what the user's end device might be, like a cell phone or a tablet, to what type of connection does the house actually have to have, and then where is that coming from. So we did everything in terms of the feasibility study that's dealing with the planning and the ground survey, going door to door in the community. And Brad Anguson and myself actually flew down to Ketchikan. I've been down there a couple of times to meet with the tribes, the tribal council. There's 2 tribes in the community, meet with the native corporation that's funding this project. And so it's as a resource for them, it's the council is proving its weight in gold, because they're going to use all of this demographic information for grants going forward, very specific to their needs. We can help with strategic planning and then a needs assessment. And one of the things we were able to do with the Cape Fox community is do a needs assessment. They sent one out on their own, and they had a very low response. So we asked them if we could send one out, and about 2 months later, and we redesigned it, redeployed it, and they only had about 1% of theirs returned. We changed the strategy up a little bit, and we've had about 50% return from the community. So it really helps us when we're looking at what the needs of the community are. But we have build outs that are actually low Earth orbit, the OneWeb style deployments that are happening across Alaska. So even remote locations, we're developing solutions that just start out with planning. And so the Telecom Council has the opportunity to sit down with the tribal council and say, what is it, what's your need, and what infrastructure exists, and how are we going to fund it? And I think this is great, bringing everyone together in an arrangement like this, because you get to meet funders, you get to meet those that can advocate for you, and you can also talk to other resources that help you with planning. And I think that's one of the biggest areas of need. I think with that's most of what I wanted to share initially, but as you have questions, or you might be interested in learning more about how the Tribal Telecom Council can be a resource for you, or you'd like to be a member or an affiliate member, and you want to start looking at it as a place to get information from, to understand, just the opportunities that exist within the broadband space for tribes, just keep in mind that our angle is always going to be to advocate and benefit the tribe, but affiliates and others that are in the telecom space, we're there as a resource for them too, because they may want to access tribes or tribal resources, and it's kind of a one-stop shop in that regard.
Thank you, Terrence, for all of that information. We really appreciate it. And I know Megan had put in the chat the website for Alaska Tribal Broadband. If you have any questions for Terrence, please send those over in the question box for our Q&A at the end. So thank you, Terrence. All right, Ernie, you're up.
Thank you, Katrina. Poso on it now. Yom case moments and Yom Kon. I wake up every morning and try and remember those words. They were taught to me when I was younger, when I was much younger, and I didn't understand the significance of them when I was younger, but I do now. As I get older and I see opportunities in every day, the meaning behind those words is that there is opportunity every day. And in this particular situation with broadband and this broadband funding stream that are being deployed as a result of the broadband bipartisan infrastructure law, we have this opportunity to transform our communities in a 7th generational way, to do something beyond just an immediate fix to our community's needs. We absolutely need to be in that space, but we also should be working to consider, again, those 7th generational impacts. So next slide, please. So thank you, Katrina, for the introduction. And so a bit of context about me. As Katrina had shared, I'm a citizen of the United Nation of Wisconsin, but grew up in the Menominee Reservation, also in Wisconsin. I married a Spokane tribal member about 25 years ago when I came out to Washington, and I now work for the Colville tribes. So it's been a long and varied story, and I'm in awe of Terrence and Katrina being able to continue to work and serve in their places that their ancestors have called home forever. So I really appreciate being able to share this platform with you today. But again, I found myself here working for the Colvilles, and briefly, I worked for the Washington State Department of Commerce and the Washington State Broadband Office. One is their tribal liaison for the Department of Commerce, and then second, I was the digital equity manager for the State Broadband Office. And through that time and through that experience, the pandemic revealed, of course, this immense need for broadband across Indian country, just really everywhere, not just Indian country, but that became, of course, because I have this deep connection to Indian country, that became my focus. And I like to talk about how, again, we're not limited by the borders of the reservation. We should never allow ourselves to be limited by what the federal government says, this is where, this is where you belong and this is who you are. Let's think beyond those borders and think beyond and into those areas that are indigenous to us. The Colville tribes are 12 tribes. They're a confederation of tribes. And when I started working for them, I made it immediately, I need to know what those tribes are. And so I got to know the area and understand that each one of those tribal identities is associated with a different place that extends beyond that borders. So next slide, please. And so we began our process with this idea of, it was about, we began the process and stepped off with the wrong foot. We began chasing grants, and it was like, we need to get the grant. And it became clear quickly that that was the wrong approach, that instead we needed to establish a vision and guide us. And a grant became simply a tactic within this larger strategy of achieving the highest quality of life for all the people, everyone. And again, thinking in that 7th generational way, thinking beyond, the immediate impact of a funding opportunity. And, how does this support what our larger goal is? So that shift in mindset and shift in approach, proved very valuable in coalescing. Just as Terrence had mentioned, the ability to bring community together around an idea rather than we need to get the grant. It became one where this is an approach we need to have in everything we do. So Katrina, next slide, please. And so with that, we understood that we needed to start pulling together different partners in, and some of those partners, were a bit surly. They weren't partners that we had a strong track record with. We had, local governments that seemingly were always at odds with the tribes, seemingly, bucked back on everything we tried to do, always questioned, why did the tribes get something that we don't? And so we knew that it was going to be difficult for us to actually form a partnership that was going to be reliable, dependable, and stand the test of difficult decisions. And so we actually created memorandums of agreement with local governments, Ferry County and Okanagan County, as you'll see on the right. Those are actual, screenshots of the memorandums of agreement with those counties to develop our broadband action team. And during that time, it was about infrastructure. It was about getting to the point where we had infrastructure to deploy across these two very rural, very remote, and economically distressed communities. And the Colville tribes found themselves in a position to lead those conversations. But we needed something that we needed a foundation for these conversations. And so that those MOAs actually proved to be valuable. And we relied on them on a couple of different occasions when both Ferry County and Okanagan County wanted to walk away from the relationship. And we just said, we got to remind you that we have an MOA here. You can't just walk away. We have unfinished business. Let's get to it. Now we've got great infrastructure funding on the horizon. as a result of, you know, a lot of good partners. And next slide, please. Great partners over, you know, several, you know, again, several years of development, you know, decades of development. And the result has been, you know, we've got fiber deployment across the reservation and to the tune of about 90 miles of fiber at this point, with another, you know, about 200 miles on the horizon. We've got several contractors that we've gone through. And again, all of this was able to stand the test of staff turnover, leadership turnover, different people coming to and leaving the table. But we were all unified by that vision. Again, that vision of creating the highest quality of life on the reservation and understanding this is but a strategy, you know, for doing it. Grants are but a strategy. And that became that, again, that reason why we continue to come back to the table. And the next slide, please. And getting us to the point where we can actually begin to deploy things like the 2.5 gigahertz spectrum that was awarded to the Colville tribes, you know, just over a year ago, and meet our obligation to the FCC and say that we now own that spectrum, and we're now in a position to begin to start offering service across the Colville reservation to, you know, at this point, you know, we got about 150 pilot homes that are being served. We're ironing out some of our workforce challenges, all the other things that when we jumped into this space, we knew might be a challenge. But at the same time, you know, we went in with eyes wide open because, again, we've got so many partners to kind of help inform what that's going to look like, and get us to the point where we're ready to begin establishing some standards and getting us to the point where we're offering quality service and achieving that vision. And so next slide, please. So we're going from, you know, that fiber network, or excuse me, that hybrid fiber and wireless network to hopefully a full fiber build out. Colville Reservation is roughly the size of the state of Delaware. Several river valleys, several mountain passes. You know, I think it's 4 river valleys and 3 mountain passes. Very remote, very rugged terrain, and certainly a challenge for any construction project of this magnitude. So next slide, please. And so carries us through and gets us to the point where we feel like we've achieved our vision, at least in terms of broadband and the infrastructure deployment. And then we're now asking the questions of what's next. Now that we have that, or it's on the horizon and we're going to achieve it, what's next? How do we ensure that digital equity is sustainable beyond the life cycle of a grant? And as Terrence had mentioned, you know, things like a policy group, joining a policy group to inform federal policy, to ensure that we have the mechanisms that are going to support digital equity. So that's the importance of, you know, what Terrence and the work that he's doing, and folks like NTTA and you know, here in the Pacific Northwest, we have the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians that will inform the National Congress of American Indians of what our policy goals are. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about now. In addition to how do we fully build out and realize what a digital economy looks like? And I'm not talking about crypto or anything like that. I'm talking about how do we actually utilize all this fiber to an economic benefit that, again, considers that 7th generation and looks at, again, how we're actually going to bring full economic benefit of this new tool. And so last slide, I believe this would be the last slide. Oh, and see, and this is again where do we see this taking us? And you'll see our policy partners with NCAI and AT&I, as I mentioned, and of course, and I, you know, I don't, that photo of the tower climber is not ours, but on about my 3rd day on the job here at Bigfoot Telecommunications, I had the good fortune of going out and watching our own workforce climb towers, and fully equipped, went through a safety meeting, successful climb, went up, did maintenance. They've done their own installation, and it's self-determination in action. It was just inspiration to see, and so I think that's the last of my presentation at this point. Yeah, so thank you. And of course, just as Terrence had mentioned, any questions, and as we move forward, what that's going to look like with these other unanswered questions of our own, and anything we can do to help you find your own answers. So thank you, Katrina.
Thank you, Ernie. I would love to hear you share how to say thank you. Will you have listed here? Are you able to?
Oh, Wewenin.
Wewenin. Okay.
So again, all of my tribal affiliations, Wewenin is Menominee, Yowago, Oneida, Miigwech is Ojibwe, and of course I'm mixed race, so thank you.
Wonderful. Well, in Yupik, where I drive from, they say Guyana, so Guyana. Thank you so much for sharing. And a reminder, if you have any questions for Ernie, please send those over in the question box. And we really appreciate your, especially the 7th generation. I really appreciate you sharing about that. That's really something we all need to think about. So, all right, Megan, you're up.
All right. So again, thank you to Terrence and to Ernie. I'm going to build kind of upon what those two gentlemen set up in terms of creating your partnerships, creating your community, identifying the needs, and finding your resources and your good partners, and pivot then into just the grants world. So as Ernie pointed out, it's not a time to just jump in because the grant is there. There's a lot of groundwork. But once you get that done, once you have your people in place, you can look for grants, and that's where we excel. So the soon to come opportunity, as I'm sure everyone is aware, is the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program. So this will be round 2, so similar to what happened last summer with the deadline of last September. They've been going through the process of awarding from round 1. Round 2 was set to have $2 billion, but they have taken $1 billion from this and given it to round 1, as I'm sure everyone's aware. And so this round 2 will just have $1 billion in it. We're expecting to see this open from probably November time is what we've been hearing. A difference from last time is that there's going to be a 6-month application window. So this will give you some time to really solidify some of your partnerships, your plans, make sure you can be as ready for your application as possible. It's quite unusual to see this big of a time frame for a window or for an application, so it's really exciting to see it here. Eligible uses of funding will be most likely the same as last round. So you're looking at broadband deployment projects and broadband adoption projects. One of the other updates that we have from round 1 is that they're looking to waive the Buy American for this round of funding. So that I know previously has kind of presented an obstacle in deploying broadband. NTIA is asking for a waiver for the tribal connectivity program to remove the Buy America. So we hope that that will make things easier. So that's the overview of that. And then thinking, how can you be competitive? So I've broken this down into 3 sections: all applicants, partial funding round 1 applicants, and full funding round 1 applicants. I will say new applicants, if there are some on our webinar here, would be under the all applicants. So these are tips that can go for everyone. The first one is to show support. So what we mean by this is community involvement. Community involvement has always been a big part of any project, and we're now starting to see granting agencies put more emphasis on that. So when you think about writing your grant, about putting it together, think about how you can show your community involvement, how you can show support of the project. The next is to have thorough and detailed finances. So I'm sure for many of you, if you've done this before, you've had some follow-up on breaking down your finances. So being as detailed as possible. If this is a breakdown of permits, which permits you need instead of one line item of just permits. If it's travel, breaking down travel into hotels, into airfare, to avoid that back and forth with the granting agency. break it down as much as you can in the beginning so you don't have to handle that at the back end. Display your team strengths. What we mean by this is think broadly, so not just your immediate team of broadband people. Think of those who work for your tribe and community engagement, getting people to your take rate, getting people to sign up. That's a part of the project as well. So if you have folks who are very involved in the community in that kind of manner, include them in your application. Talk about the diverse strengths of your team. That can give a very holistic picture and show that you kind of are ready and prepared and you have great people with you. So for partial funding, folks, use or mention what you have done with your 500,000. It may be something that you have currently done or that you are in the process of doing, but be sure to acknowledge that in your next round of funding. And show your preparedness. So what have you done between round 1 and now? What are you going to do with that, kind of preparation, and how is it different from your first application? Kind of goes into the third point there, is considering the feedback. So if you did get that 500,000, you had a lot of back and forth with your contact at NTIA. So consider what those conversations were and take that and how you can strengthen your application for the next round. For those who got full funding and are looking to do another project, which again, we encourage you, it's an opportunity to have funds to do strengthening projects. So just because you got full funding in round 1 doesn't mean you shouldn't go again. So mention how your new project complements what you previously got funded for. Make sure you're tying that together and that you're presenting a comprehensive picture of how you're really working towards this broader goal of internet for all. Also show the successes of what you've done since round 1, since your funding, and be honest about it. If you've hit roadblocks, if you have the understandable ones, if you haven't been able to get all your supplies, all your fiber, be honest about the roadblocks. But also show what you're doing, show your active involvement and what you're doing to get past these roadblocks, what you're doing in the meantime, how you're still continuing on your project. So grant tips. So that was how you can be competitive. These are just grant tips across the board. You can use these for NTIA, you can use them for EDA, you can use them for USDA, all the agencies. First tip, read the NOFO. This means front to back. You'll find that sometimes there's, unfortunately, little hidden bits of what they want to see in those last pages of the NOFO. So make sure that you give it a full read through. It can be long, but it is worth it. Be consistent. So if you use statistics or numbers early on, make sure you are consistent throughout your application with those. We have had kind of back and forth on that. And, when you have your updates from NTIA, when you're making your revisions, make sure you continue to be consistent in your statistics. The third one is to be concise. So it is likely that this will be done through the new NTIA portal. So unlike last time, where everything was submitted through grants.gov, we're expecting to see this through the new NTIA portal. I did try to get that confirmed before the webinar, reaching out to a contact, but she was unsure and she was checking, but it is likely that they'll be using their own portal. In that portal, there's a word count, a character count. So we don't have as much space as we may have before to really paint the picture. So be concise, get those main points, those punching details, and put those in. Utilize partnerships. So kind of as Terrence and Ernie said, really coming back to relying on your partners, on folks like Ernie and the Terrence's organization. I mean, there are people and organizations out there that are looking to help and that have resources. Utilize them, lean on them, learn from them. They make your grant application all much stronger. The next one is to use decimal points in the budget. So this is something that we learned in the NTIA portal for middle mile, is that they are going to be looking for budgets down to 2 decimal points. So it's often tempting to have very round numbers in your budget. They're pretty, they look nice, but it won't match up. You'll get an error message in the portal, and then you have to go back and figure out where there's a difference, what's happening. So from the get-go, make sure that you're using 2 decimal points in your budget. And that might be something that you have to work with your engineering partners on and let them know, hey, we need to have our budget with 2 decimal points. So kind of a different thing than we may have seen previously, but it now is a consideration. Again, going back to what I said before, break down your budget. I'm sure everyone at the last round of NTIA, if you were an applicant, this was your big back and forth, was about your budget, about refining it, about explaining it. Break it down as much as you can. It'll also then make your explanations easier. So when you're doing that budget narrative, if you're fully broken down, you can easily explain what permits are. You can easily explain what kind of travel, what kind of activities you're doing. We have seen pushback on just having a line item of materials. What materials do you need for your project? So that, again, is an area where you can show that you are ready, you understand what you're doing, and you can be competitive. Again, ties back to utilizing your partnerships. Make sure that your partners can help you understand what might be a little confusing. I know at LDA, we often do that. We often turn to our partners when something is a bit vague or unclear and say, hey, can you help us understand so we can put our best foot forward? So those are some kind of all-around grant tips that, again, you use for NTIA in terms of that decimal points, but all of them are helpful no matter what opportunity you're looking at. Which will bring me a bit to the next slide, other opportunities. So there is other funding out there. The tribal, from NTIA, the Tribal Connectivity Program is a great one. It is unique just for tribes, but tribes are eligible applicants in other opportunities. So here I have a list and when we anticipate them coming out. So Community Connect is a program through USDA. We've heard that that will be opening this December. So if you are thinking of an NTIA project and realize a part of it might need more funding, this could be another opportunity. The USDA DLT, I have November here, but I learned yesterday that it also might be December. This is distance learning and telehealth. So when you're thinking of building the broadband, right, you have an adoption component. So what are the needs of your tribe? What kind of, Terrence talked about the distance learning, talked about the telehealth. These are all components of connectivity, of Internet for All. So it often takes more than one funding source. And USDA DLT is a great one for that distance learning and telehealth. There's state programs for this year and for next year. For those of you in Washington, we hear that the Washington program may be coming out towards the end of the year as well. Next year, we will see a lot more state programs. So we'll see less from NTIA. So look more towards your state and what opportunities will be there. Again, tribal entities are applicants, and they're often, a good competitive applicant in these state programs. We anticipate, again, there being another round of USDA Reconnect. That one is open right now. Hopefully some of you have been able to seize that opportunity. It is, again, another good source to get a full project going. Then in 2024, there's the Digital Equity Grant through NTIA. This, again, kind of goes back to that holistic view of Internet for All. Just because you build the broadband, if you don't have the devices, if you don't have the adoption, if you don't have the knowledge of how to use this technology, that digital equity grant will be great for training programs, for supplies, for outreach. It's really going to encompass all activities that are there to bridge that digital divide. The State Digital Equity Program, this is coming from the sources or from the funds from NTIA, but it's then being given to the states for them to develop their own programs. So those, again, we anticipate seeing in 2024, probably around the same time as the NTIA, but those are other good opportunities. There's also the tribal digital equity, which I know many tribes have applied for. And as far as I have heard, the last update is that still just have a acceptance letter with more details coming. So unfortunately, I have probably not a better idea than you do of what that timeline might look like. But I would say that, you know, LDA is here if you need to talk through ideas on that, on how to go about developing programs, about how to put together your digital equity application, about reporting, really all of that. As Katrina said in the beginning, you know, we do grant management and consulting. We can help you talk through things on top of applying and writing the grants. So, you know, really there's a lot of funding out there. It is competitive, but, you know, thinking about these grant tips about what you can do and about who you can partner with, who you can turn to, you know, is going to be something that's very helpful to get that full funding from these opportunities. That is my grants overview. I think our next slide is just for questions. I'm going to, although, take off the slide because I prefer seeing everyone's face very big instead of small little faces at the top. So stop share. And I know I saw some questions come in, so I believe Katrina's going to be able to lead us through that.
Thank you, Megan, for all of those grant tidbits and information on upcoming opportunities to look at. We do have a question and some others that have come in. I will start with Ernie. Brad asked, are there any delays in NTIA funding for your deployments?
I think that one of the biggest delays or frustrations was hearing that we were in a position to receive an award and it not yet being confirmed. That became a real point of anxiety and frustration, and it felt like we can't move forward with us, you know, any other phases. And it felt like every other grant opportunity that we were going to put, any other grant proposal that we were going to put together, was going to have to feel in some ways redundant to what we presented to NTIA. And so it was, and I don't like laying parallel trap lines, knowing that, you know, hey, one is on the game trail and another, you know, we're just not going to, we don't know if it's on the game trail or not. And so there were some delays, and it was absolutely frustrating. We shared with our program officer our frustration. She was sympathetic. She did everything she could to try and get us answers. And then on Tuesday of this past week, we actually got permission to go public with our award. We got a $48.5 million award that was that we can now go public with on Tuesday. So there were some challenges along the way, of course. Yes.
All right. Thank you for sharing. Question for Terrence. Does the Tribal Telecom Council offer guidance to tribes or other entities outside of Alaska?
Yeah, we initially was set up to be specific to Alaska, but our discussions have been much broader than that, saying that there isn't necessarily an avenue for tribes outside of Alaska. And so as this is an ongoing conversation, yes, we want you to reach out to us, because I think there are a lot of things that we can still work with and collaborate and be a networking tool, and particularly for the voice and advocacy pieces, because when we're going back speaking to folks in DC and with delegation representatives, we're representing all 530 tribes in the US. So, you know, that voice is very consistent. And so I would say, yes, reach out to us. And we are working on that opportunity to just create an encompassing umbrella for all of the tribes that exist. But our starting point was in Alaska, because this was such a new thing for us.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back to Megan. Can LDA work with internal grant teams?
So yes, we often do, and we did in the last round of our tribal connectivity grants. We actually really enjoy working with internal grant folks, because they often know how to tell the story of the tribe better than we can, right? We're coming in with our knowledge about broadband, about grants, but the story of your people, that's something that your internal grant writers are much better at telling. And so we greatly enjoy working with those who know the community better and who can paint that picture, and bring the details of what the issues look like and what they are. So, you know, absolutely we work with internal grant writers. Our goal then after the end of a grant is that your internal grant writer then has a better understanding of broadband knowledge, and maybe you don't need us next time. we do love working with people again and again, but we're here to not only teach, but to, you know, kind of help your internal grant team grow so you can do a broadband grant on your own if you desire, or you can come back.
Wonderful, thank you. Coming back to Ernie, what distinguishes the approach you all have taken at the Colville tribes from your neighboring communities?
Again, going back to seventh generational thinking, you know, we take a very long-term approach. I think how you do that is going to be unique in that you receive that community input, and that this becomes a very critical point in Indian country, being able to balance, you know, the current demands of service, whatever it might be, whether it's public safety or whatever it might be, drug and alcohol treatment, broadband, having that community conversation so that you can gain the political will to move a project forward. You know, and this is politics. We know that the tribal councils turn over almost yearly. And how do we maintain that momentum that we gained under one regime to carry forward with the next? And so we put it through a process of a decision matrix. And I know this doesn't sound like seventh generational approaches, but it really is taking a practical approach to ensure that community voices are heard and we achieve sustainability and being able to maintain that momentum throughout the life of a project. So the decision matrix is often heavily weighted with community voice to ensure that those community voices are factor into the decision about, you know, where to move a project forward with, when to move it forward, and its desired outcomes. And then that really achieves, again, that momentum that we're looking for in the transfer of whether it's political leadership, staff turnover, whatever it might be.
Thank you for sharing. We have another one for Megan. What part of the application will take the most time or require the most effort, do you think?
A good question. I will say, on the one hand, it depends. Depends upon what you may have done before, what you can repurpose from a previous application. One thing that I think we often spent a lot of time on was the budgetary stuff. So the budget narrative, making sure you have the detailed explanation of what that is. Broadband budgets can be very large, right? And they want you to write out what you mean by every single line item, which can take time. Especially, you know, we always suggest to do it in a manner that a layman could understand. So you may get a budget from an engineer and may have some terms or some parts that just make no sense, and you need to write it down in your budget. So that's then kind of discussion back and forth. But we always say when you're doing that budget narrative, make it so, you know, if my grandmother came and she read it, she would have a semblance of understanding what we're talking about. Because we don't know, you know, the whole education of engineering knowledge of your reviewers, right? So you want to make sure that it's understandable for everyone. So I would say certainly the budgetary stuff would be something we have found takes the longest.
Tip.
Yeah, and I think I saw.
Yes, we do have a couple more questions.
Okay.
Sorry. I'll go ahead with Terrence, since I know you just, Terrence, how do tribes join TTCA?
We'll just make sure that our information is shared here. Once you come on, what we'll usually require is just a letter of interest, and then and if you want to have a board seat, it's a resolution from the tribe. But we'll just get started by opening that dialogue. We'll send you out some information, and then we'll kind of go from there. But it's one of those painless kinds of things to be a part of it. It's really your trade organization for tribes in this area.
Thank you. Wonderful. And Megan, we have one more for you. Does LDA have capacity to work with larger Alaska tribal consortiums or just individual tribes?
Absolutely. So we can work with consortiums. We've often done applications where there's many partners involved. So that's a somewhat similar situation to a consortium, where you have perhaps 5 different areas, 5 different tribes coming together. So absolutely, we're very flexible in who we work with and how we work with, and always happy to figure something out. Again, we're here with the same goal, humbly coming in, also wanting to bring the connectivity to Indian country, and do what we can in our part of that. I'll take a quick moment. I know we've kind of talked about Brad quite a few times here, and the work he's done. I'm gonna do a quick allow to talk. I think he had a few final comments, wanted to supplement for what Terrence had said. So I think I'll be doing this right. There we go, Brad. We've got the floor is yours for a few moments here.
Okay, can you all hear me? Fine?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, thanks for allowing us to participate and join. I think the key takeaway with all this information here, Megan and Katrina, is being knowledgeable in all the resources that are dropping from the government. There are multiple agencies that have multiple broadband objectives, and if you're not on top of it, then the flow of information gets cut off. And what we are finding, at least with our Alaska neighbors and the tribes that we're working with, there are a number of tribes that simply don't have enough information. And we are working to sort of untangle that spaghetti mess along with Terrence's group, Tribal Telecom of Alaska, which I will just add is a great vehicle for advocacy if your tribe is in need of communicating a message, especially to the delegate leadership. Terrence's group is an excellent vehicle for that. But Megan, I don't really have anything more to add to that other than for my Alaska neighbors to please, if anything, educate yourself, make informed decisions, learn all of the resources that are available to your community, because this is an unprecedented objective that we may never see ever again. So that's it.
Yeah. I'm actually then could kind of take that back to Ernie and something I know that you had mentioned. You had mentioned some partners that do similar work in the lower 48. And, I loved hearing Terrence talk about how the Tribal Telecom Council is for everyone. But can you remind who you had mentioned, Ernie, as a resource for information and as Brad was saying, kind of untangling the spaghetti of funding?
Sometimes untangling the spaghetti, and it's not necessarily about funding or anything. You don't know what you need to untangle until you get into it. You don't realize what a spaghetti's mess it is until you find yourself firmly into it. And so you need to find those partners to help sort that out. In the case of policy partners, again, we won't know what policies are keeping us from being able to achieve our goals until we get into and then run into that policy barrier. So we have to have that relationship with, say, the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians to actually advance policy to the national level so that we can actually achieve our goals. NCAI, of course, National Congress of American Indians, is at that national level here in DC, providing that voice on the Hill, but they won't know themselves. And we've had many conversations with NCAI about potential policy fixes to some real challenges that are unique to Indian country. And yet they're waiting themselves for somebody to bring it forward. We'd love to get behind that, but we can't do it without a tribe taking that step into that policy space, taking a step into that provider space, finding out what those challenges are, and oh, hey, there's a policy fix to that. And then we need to advance it to that national level. So it does take a little bit of constitution. It takes a little bit of, you got to be fearless at times, and get yourself to the point where, again, you got that support for, being brave and getting into a place where you're actually having an impact beyond just the borders of your res, and you're having an impact in many communities.
Thank you, Ernie. Thank you, Brad, for coming on. We have a couple more questions to end before we have to end our time today. One for Terrence. Does the Tribal Telecom Council offer one-on-one consultation?
Yes, and that was the big conversation we talked about over the last couple of days. And it doesn't matter where you are or what your tribal affiliation is, but that is a strong point of what we do, is that one-on-one consultation is a big part of what we'll provide to tribes that have a need. And we want to use that consultation opportunity to figure out what it is your interests are, what you have questions about, what your needs are, and let's build that relationship. And the only way we can really do that is to start out with that one-on-one. And we hope that that's kind of how we maintain that relationship, is with you, that when you're communicating with the council, you are the priority. And as you have a need or we see an opportunity for you to network, we want that to utilize that as a vehicle. So yes, please reach out.
Wonderful. And one more question for Megan. Are there any other major differences between round 1 and round 2?
Again, I think the big ones are the time frame in which you have to submit your application. The waiver of the Buy America is another big one. And then we will see if they're using the new NTIA portal, but that would certainly be another big change between the manner of submission and the method of submission. But I think that those are kind of the biggest ones that we anticipate coming.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, I think we're at our time for today, or close to our time. Thank you all for attending, and thank you so much to our panelists. Hope you've had some key takeaways from our time today, and we'll be sending out the slide deck and recording shortly, along with all of our contact information. You could see Megan and mine is there, but we'll also share contact information for our panelists. So thank you all so much, and take care.
Also.